In a special interview not long ago, Linda Ronstadt, the amazing singer who ruled the entire 1970s with her beautiful voice, finally decided to talk about something she'd kept quiet about for years. She didn't want to discuss her famous songs or the exciting nights performing on stage. Instead, Linda wanted to tell everyone about 8 men who hurt her feelings really badly during her life. One man caused a huge, public mess after he got jealous at a fancy hotel in Beverly Hills. Another man said mean things about her singing voice while they were working together in a recording studio. And one guy used her kindness like a ladder, just to climb up and become famous himself. Who were these 8 men? And what could make a woman known for staying calm and collected finally admit that some hurts, no matter how much time goes by, never really go away? Number 1. Mick Jagger. The Secret Romance. When the wife met the other woman at the same hotel by the middle of the 1970s, Mick Jagger was super famous. The Rolling Stones had just finished their Love You Live tour in 1977, and newspapers in Britain were calling him the most dangerous man in rock music. During that time, Jagger was married to Bianca Perez Mora Macias, an actress and model born in Nicaragua. Their marriage was seen as a symbol of power and glamour in the entertainment world. But behind all the shiny photographs, newspapers in the West started whispering about quiet problems growing between them. Meanwhile, Linda Ronstadt, America's rising country and pop star, had become so popular that her face was regularly on the covers of Time magazine and People magazine. She was the most wanted voice in Los Angeles, a symbol of independent, self-made women in the music business. The two first met at an after-party. For the Grammy Awards in 1977, the party was hosted by a music producer named Peter Asher at the Beverly Hills Hotel. According to Vanity Fair magazine, it was Asher who introduced them, and the chemistry between these two music legends happened so quickly that it shocked the whole industry. By early 1978, Linda and Mick started showing up together at several events all around California. Photographers from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner newspaper took pictures of them leaving a place called Chateau Marmont. Mick was holding a wine glass and Linda was covering her face from cameras using a scarf. 1 week later, Rolling Stone magazine published an article with the title, "Linda's Dangerous Liaison," suggesting that their connection went way beyond just being friends. The story exploded like a bomb because at that time, Bianca Jagger was still Mick's legal wife. Their marriage had been struggling because of his wild lifestyle, but they weren't officially separated yet. In August 1978, Bianca suddenly flew to Los Angeles to confront them. A person who worked at the hotel told the Daily Mail newspaper that a heated argument between all 3 of them lasted almost an hour inside a suite on the 8th floor. Nobody knew exactly what was said, but the next morning, Linda left the city and canceled her planned appearance on NBC's Midnight Special TV show. The newspapers in Britain and America ate up this scandal. The Guardian newspaper called it a showdown between America's queen and the wife of Britain's rock legend. The attention fell really heavily on Linda, who had just been named one of People magazine's Women of the Year. Reporters claimed she had been pulled into a relationship she couldn't control, becoming an unwilling third person in a marriage that was falling apart. In the months that followed, Linda's image was everywhere, on television screens and in tabloid magazines. She stayed completely silent for over 3 months, avoiding all interviews. Friends said she went away to Santa Fe to stay with another singer friend named Emmylou Harris, hiding from the public storm. During that time, Mick faced his own backlash as old scandals came back up, especially the famous 1967 Redlands drug arrest. This was brought back up by NME magazine and BBC's Panorama show, which made his reputation even worse. By early 1979, when everything finally calmed down, Linda came back out for the cover photo shoot of her album Mad Love. In an interview with journalist Cameron Crowe, she admitted that the relationship had taught her the price of believing in the spotlight. Crowe remembered later that Linda never said Mick's name out loud, but every time she paused at the words "stage lights," it was totally clear whom she was thinking about. After that whole episode, Linda Ronstadt stayed away from the male-dominated rock scene. She focused instead on her own music and softer ballad projects. Still, the emotional scars from her romance with Jagger really deeply shaped the way she looked at other male musicians, especially when the next man to enter her artistic life wasn't a boyfriend, but a musician, a man who was both brilliant and difficult. His name was Paul Simon. Number 2. Paul Simon, a team-up. Destroyed by perfectionism and disrespect. After the messy chapter with Mick Jagger, Linda Ronstadt turned all her attention to making music in the recording studio. In early 1982, she signed a contract to work together with Paul Simon, who was praised as one of America's smartest songwriters. At the time, Simon was getting ready to make his album Hearts and Bones, a personal project expected to follow the success of Still Crazy after all these years. Warner Brothers Records promoted Linda's participation as the key ingredient to taking the project worldwide. Their first recording session happened at Studio 55 in Hollywood, California, a legendary place known for major works by bands like Fleetwood Mac and singer Carly Simon. Every detail was watched closely by the media. According to the Los Angeles Times in March 1983, Simon had the entire sound system rebuilt to make the natural echo better. This careful setup caused delays, and tension started to fill the studio. Paul Simon was famously perfectionistic to an extreme level. He demanded dozens and dozens of takes just to fine-tune the pitch of a backing vocal. Linda Ronstadt, on the other hand, came from a country music background. She was used to recording live and accepting imperfection. Problems came up when Simon criticized her approach as unsuitable for a modern sound structure. Engineers remembered that one session, stretched over 12 hours, with Linda stepping outside repeatedly to calm herself down. Producer Val Garay, who had worked with Linda before, later told Billboard magazine in 1985 that she felt deeply insulted by Simon's repeated commands to "sing it again until I hear what I want." After 3 sessions, Linda walked away, leaving no completed songs behind. At first, Warner Brothers put out a vague statement claiming the project was paused for technical reasons. But weeks later, a Variety reporter revealed that internal fights had broken out when Simon insisted on removing all of Linda's vocals from the original mixes. When Hearts and Bones was finally released in October 1983, Linda's name was nowhere to be found. The album flopped commercially. It only made it to number 35 on the Billboard 200 chart. That same year, Linda released What's New with conductor Nelson Riddle, selling over 2 million copies within months. The contrast led the American press to call it a stunning reversal of fortune. What stirred even bigger controversy were the leaks that came after. According to the New York Daily News, a technician at Studio 55 claimed Simon had said, "Linda doesn't know how to work in a professional environment." The remark made musicians really angry because Linda was known for her discipline and hard work. Rolling Stone magazine soon published a commentary titled "The Perfection Trap," criticizing Paul Simon as a prime example of dictatorial artistry in the studio. Linda never responded publicly, but close friends said she lost faith in working with male musicians for nearly a whole decade after that. In her 2013 memoir book, she wrote simply, "I met someone who made music feel like fear instead of joy." The incident ended, but the wound to her pride stayed. Just when the public thought Linda had pulled back from all conflicts, another storm came. This time on stage right in front of a live audience. And the one who struck the blow was none other than Neil Young, her former friend from the anti-war movement of the late 1970s. Number 3. Neil Young. Betrayed ideals. When a friend became the critic, in 1976, Linda Ronstadt was among America's most beloved voices. Her performances were often tied to causes, for peace, for the environment, for people who didn't have much money. At many of these events, she stood beside Neil Young, who was widely seen as the most honest anti-war voice of his generation. They shared stages in Santa Monica and San Francisco, connected by the belief that music could change how people think, but that faith started to fall apart later that same year when Linda agreed to partner with Warner Brothers for the biggest tour of her career, partially sponsored by Coca-Cola. Anti-war activists saw it as selling out. Neil Young stayed quiet until they both appeared at the No Nukes benefit concert at Cow Palace. That night, Linda performed 2 songs to huge applause, with NBC cameras zooming in on her bright smile. Behind the stage, Neil watched in silence. When his turn came, the atmosphere changed completely. Reporters described the night as charged with strange tension. No one mentioned a conflict out loud, but the audience sensed an invisible line had been drawn. The next morning, the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper ran a story titled "The Rift Behind the Stage." Music magazines began talking about an ideological divide in the anti-war movement, with Linda Ronstadt at its center. Neil Young, once her ally, was now framed as the guardian of purity, while Linda was branded the sellout star. Footage of her leaving the backstage area was replayed over and over on NBC, her tired face lit up by parking lot lights. British tabloid newspapers adopted the same phrase, the sellout star. The fallout was brutal. Linda almost disappeared from charity concerts. Organizers were afraid of backlash from anti-war supporters. Warner Brothers put out a statement saying she remained independent in her beliefs, but public opinion had already sided with Neil Young. The attack destroyed Linda's reputation within the very movement that once celebrated her. By 1977, when Neil launched the first Bridge School benefit, Linda's name was gone from the lineup. She had once helped him write the initial plans for the foundation, but all traces of her involvement were erased. A year later, when Rust Never Sleeps was released, critics noticed Neil thanked those who kept the faith, with Linda conspicuously missing from the acknowledgments. Behind the scenes in Los Angeles, rumors spread that Linda fell into deep depression after what she saw as a betrayal. She pulled away from social causes, canceled all politically related interviews, and disappeared from the stages that once inspired millions. The music world understood. A woman who once believed in the power of conviction had chosen silence after being turned into a symbol of its opposite by her own comrade. After that, Linda no longer believed in the idea of like-minded artists. She went back to the studio, cutting off all ties with the protest movement. But the world of music wasn't done with her yet. Years later, the next betrayal would not come from beliefs or politics, but from ingratitude, at the hands of a man she had once mentored when he was just an unknown drummer. His name was Don Henley. Number 4. Don Henley, the student who turned his back and the cutting remark that lingers in the early 1970s. Linda Ronstadt was a name that ruled every stage on the American West Coast. While getting ready for the tour promoting her album Silk Purse in 1971, she decided to look for a new band. On the audition list at Sound Factory in Los Angeles was a young drummer from Texas named Don Henley. He had never done an official recording and had no name yet, but Linda saw in him a solid touch and a good ear for music. She was the one who signed the invitation for him to join her touring band, opening the first door of his later career. Henley performed with Linda for 2 years, traveling across dozens of stages from the Troubadour to the Fillmore West. There he met Glenn Frey, the guitarist in the same band. The two clicked immediately and decided to split off to form the Eagles in 1972. Not only did Linda not object, she introduced them to producer John Boylan, supported their first recording session, and connected them with Asylum Records. Many critics called Linda the Eagles' uncredited godmother. When the Eagles became a phenomenon, Henley's life changed completely. From an unknown drummer, he became a symbol of American soft rock. Yet, as the fame rose, the distance between Henley and the person who had lifted him up grew as well. In the spring of 1977, when Linda Ronstadt pivoted toward classic jazz, releasing a series of albums covering old songs by Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald, many people were surprised. The press praised it as a bold move, but not everyone approved. Among the skeptics was Don Henley. In an interview on ABC Radio's program Rockline that March, when asked whether he planned to work together again with the person who had first given him a break, he answered coolly that Linda was living in nostalgia, singing what others have already done better. The remark spread not only over the airwaves, but was also quoted word for word by the Los Angeles Times in its March 28, 1977 issue. The media quickly stirred the pot, treating it as a public insult against the very person who had helped him get his start. The reaction within the music community was swift. Some of Linda's close colleagues were really mad. Rolling Stone magazine ran a brief commentary titled "When Gratitude Fades," calling Henley's words a textbook example of the price of fame. Many who had seen Linda as a model of independent artistry now felt sympathy as they watched her be mocked by a former student in public. Linda herself said nothing, but her actions spoke loudly. 2 weeks later, the organizers of the Living in the USA tour announced the lineup of supporting musicians. Don Henley's name had initially appeared on the list, but it was quickly crossed out. According to a Variety report, she took away his tour credentials as soon as she read the article. Producers said Linda stayed absolutely silent throughout the meeting, only requesting that all drum parts be replaced for the opening show. After that, she never mentioned Don Henley again. In the years that followed, whenever reporters brought up that period, Linda avoided answering. But colleagues said that she once said, "There's nothing worse than watching someone you trusted publicly deny your worth to the world." From then on, she stayed away from any projects related to the Eagles, despite many invitations. Ironically, just a few years after that cutting remark, Henley was caught up in a serious scandal in Beverly Hills in 1980, when he was arrested by police for hosting a drug-fueled party, shattering his image as a serious artist. The media dug up the past and compared the two careers. By then, Linda had triumphed with What's New, while Henley was stuck in scandal. People magazine ran a biting line: "The one who was mocked has now become the one still standing." From that point on, Linda Ronstadt never said Don Henley's name in any interview. The music world quietly understood that an unbridgeable gap lay between them. The story became a textbook example of betrayal behind the spotlight, when gratitude is replaced by arrogance. After 1980, Linda pulled away from loud rock stages and went to Laurel Canyon to record more intimate personal music. But the peace there did not last long. Within that very community of artists, often considered her second family, a new crack formed. And the person who dealt Linda another blow was David Crosby, a longtime friend who had once stood beside her through endless recording nights in the 1970s. Number 5. David Crosby, a Laurel Canyon. Friendship shattered by ego in the early 1970s. Laurel Canyon felt like a small kingdom tucked among Hollywood's windy hills. Wooden houses peeked through the trees, and every night rang with guitars, voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. In that world, Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby were two rare, kindred spirits. They often met in the late afternoon, gathering with friends in Crosby's cabin on Lookout Mountain, playing unfinished demo recordings for each other, discussing harmony parts and breath control, and talking about how to give American music a soul of its own. Crosby used to tell people that Linda was the woman with the most natural musical instincts in Laurel Canyon. They performed together, appeared at friends' sessions, and sat backstage listening to Joni Mitchell or Neil Young try out early songs. Laurel Canyon felt like family then, and Linda believed she was among people who understood and respected each other. Things began to change in 1974 when Asylum Records funded a small experimental project featuring many Laurel Canyon artists. Linda and Crosby were paired for a session on Sail Away, a simple, gentle ballad. At first, the studio buzzed with energy. Crosby brought his 12-string guitar, and Linda needed only a microphone and a few lyric sheets. They ran it once, and the whole crew applauded. But on the second take, Crosby started to interfere. He said the song needed a more modern color, demanded a new meter, a new key, and a different arrangement. Linda fell quiet. trying to keep her voice calm, but each suggestion seemed to turn the song into something else entirely. According to a Los Angeles Times feature called The Canyon in Turmoil, published in 1975, the conflict exploded when Crosby insisted on redoing the entire arrangement Linda had already completed. Engineer Henry Louis recalled the air in the room turning heavy and silent enough to hear a pin drop. Linda kept singing, her tone growing sharper and her eyes colder. Crosby stood behind the glass, shaking his head. Finally, he set his guitar on a chair and walked out. The studio door closed with such force that the microphone rattled. Linda took off her headphones without a word, stared through the empty glass, then finished the song alone. When Heart Like a Wheel came out at the end of that year, Sail Away became a major hit, topping the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart. America called it music of gentleness and confidence. On the cover of People magazine, Linda appeared with the line, "A voice that can change an era." Somewhere in Laurel Canyon, David Crosby read that with barely hidden irritation. Friends later told Rolling Stone that he believed, "The song's success came from the harmony concept I initiated," a claim that angered those who had witnessed the session. Just weeks later, when Rolling Stone prepared a special issue on women in rock, a reporter asked Crosby about the rise of female artists. The November 10, 1975 piece quoted him word for word. "Many famous female singers aren't famous for music, but because the image was crafted the right way." The line cut into Linda like a knife. No names were mentioned, but the public knew exactly whom he meant. The media exploded. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner ran a forum on substance or image, with Linda's photo beside the headline, "The Manufactured Woman." Late-night shows replayed her performances and asked, "Is she truly an artist?" The insult nearly broke her. Linda canceled all recording sessions for the month and skipped every event. A close friend said she sat for hours in her small Laurel Canyon home. No lights on, no music playing, just staring out the window at the dark slope. Other artists pushed back hard. Joni Mitchell refused to work with Crosby on an NBC program, and producer Peter Asher, who worked directly with Linda, called his remark proof of patriarchal attitudes embedded in American music. The Village Voice newspaper ran "The Rift in Laurel Canyon," describing a place once free-spirited, now split in two by a single sentence. The breaking point came when Linda returned to the stage for a charity concert in Santa Monica in December 1975. Before thousands of fans, she sang "You're No Good" with such force that the audience shivered. The hall rose to its feet, but Linda bowed briefly and left in silence. Critics wrote that on that night, Linda Ronstadt did not sing to perform. She sang to release her anger. After that, Linda sold her Laurel Canyon home and moved to Malibu. The music world understood that her friendship with David Crosby had ended. There were no apologies and no reunions. They avoided each other at every event and on every guest list. Laurel Canyon, once the home of hippie dreams, remained only as a fractured memory. Years later, in a rare interview on CBS Sunday Morning, Linda said something that left the nation hushed. "When people trample your trust, music stops being a shared language." That line closed an entire era, one in which trust, freedom, and friendship could vanish after a single interview. After leaving Laurel Canyon, Linda chose silence as self-protection. But fate did not stop there. The very next year, she faced another bitter experience where contempt and sexism were laid bare in the studio. The man who hurt her this time had another name: Frank Zappa. Number 6. Frank Zappa. Sexism and the belittling of a woman's voice in 1974. Los Angeles was in the middle of experimental music movements. Frank Zappa stood at the center of that creative storm. He was an eccentric composer, a technical genius, and someone the entire scene regarded carefully for his fierce temperament. Zappa believed music had to be built on mathematics and theory rather than emotion. Linda Ronstadt, then at a peak in her career, was the symbol of freedom, instinct, and an emotion-filled voice. They were introduced by Herb Cohen, who had managed both of them. The collaboration idea began at a music party in Studio City when Zappa wanted a female voice for a new arrangement in The Token of His Extreme project. Linda agreed, not out of curiosity about Zappa, but because she wanted to try something beyond the boundaries of pop music. No one knew the decision would become one of the worst experiences of her career. The first session took place at Paramount Studios. The room was crammed with instruments, cables, and electronic devices Zappa had designed himself. He asked that the lights be dimmed, leaving a single beam on the central microphone. Linda stepped in, adjusted her headphones, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice rang with feeling, warm and clear in every breath. When the take ended, the room fell silent for a few seconds. But Zappa said nothing. He tapped a pencil to the beat, then ordered another take. By the second session, the atmosphere had changed. Zappa interfered more deeply, asking Linda to cut the melismas that sounded too feminine, and to change her pronunciation to be less sentimental. Linda remained professional, but felt herself being pushed out of her own music. Those present recalled that Zappa never looked at her when giving directions, speaking only through the engineer, a coldness that felt insulting. According to journalist Mike Barnes in the Los Angeles Free Press in 1975, the conflict peaked when Zappa asked her to re-record the climax in a robot voice. When Linda asked why, he answered with mockery. The room went silent. No one dared speak. After a few stunned seconds, Linda removed her headphones, set them on the table, and walked out. The door closed, echoing off the glass like a blade, cutting everything. The next day, the session was canceled. Zappa put out a press note saying, "The project did not meet the standards of experimental spirit." NME magazine later ran a brief interview quoting Zappa, "Some voices are better suited to car commercials than to art." The line was widely seen as a direct jab at Linda Ronstadt. The Village Voice shot back, writing that, "Frank Zappa has confused genius with contempt for women." Linda did not respond. She did not sue or fight back. She simply disappeared from any project connected to Zappa. Among female artists, the aborted session became a whispered story, evidence of the injustices women endured in a male-dominated industry. In 1976, Linda returned with "Hasten Down the Wind," a quiet statement of strength. The voice was still soft, but every line seemed to carry power. Critics wrote that she had transformed hurt into music that even the proudest must bow to. Zappa never mentioned it again. In a late-life BBC interview, he only vaguely referred to a singer who did not understand my musical philosophy. Yet in the Los Angeles artist community, that 1974 story lingered like a cut that would not close. Linda, who had once considered the studio her most sacred place, walked out with a heart full of anger and a deeply wounded sense of dignity. From then on, she took no part in experimental projects. She told friends she would never again let her voice be defined by anyone but herself. Still, the music world always finds ways to test the resilient. Just a few years later, Linda found herself in another situation. Not in a studio or a professional show, but at a casual party in Los Angeles. There, amid wine, smoke, and the bravado of a generation of men drunk on fame, a boundary-crossing act turned an ordinary gathering into the most humiliating memory of Linda Ronstadt's life. The man responsible was Jim Morrison. Number 7. Jim Morrison. Disrespectful. Behavior toward Linda. In front of an audience in the summer of 1968, Los Angeles was the chaotic capital of rock and liquor. Jim Morrison, the soul of the Doors, was worshipped as a saint of rebellion, while Linda Ronstadt was just a young singer trying to find her place in a world of men. That night at the Whiskey A Go-Go on Sunset Boulevard, Linda attended a post-show party. Morrison was drunk, staggering through the haze of smoke and shouts. As the music faded, he suddenly jumped off the stage, walked to the table where Linda was sitting, and grabbed her hand, pulling her in front of hundreds of people. The spotlight hit her face and drained its color. Morrison wrapped an arm around her waist, pressed her against the microphone, and started to improvise, his voice rough with alcohol. The room fell silent. A few awkward laughs flickered and died. Linda tried to break free, but he held tight. Only when a stagehand stepped up and pulled the mic down did Morrison let go. Linda left the stage and hurried out of the club under the crowd's confused gaze. The next morning, the Los Angeles Free Press reported, "Morrison causes chaos at Whiskey A Go-Go." The article mentioned a smashed microphone, but not the woman dragged on stage. Within the artist community, however, the story spread quickly. Friends said Linda went quiet for weeks, turned down all performance invites, and stayed home to record. What terrified her was not Morrison himself, but the silence of the entire room that night. Morrison kept swaggering along. When asked about the incident on KPFK radio, he said only that women tend to exaggerate. Melody Maker magazine quoted the line, leaving a stain in the eyes of those who had admired him. Linda still did not respond. She chose silence, and that silence carried more weight than any accusation. After the whiskey incident, Linda changed completely. She stopped going to parties, avoided rock shows, and appeared only when she could control the stage. Journalist Jerry Hopkins wrote that this incident led Linda to form her own band, hiring only male musicians who respected women. No one could drag her up just to make a spectacle of her, Hopkins wrote in Rolling Stone. Years later, when Vanity Fair asked about it, Linda said, "Talent does not save anyone from their own cruelty." Short, cold, and final, it closed the most bitter memory of her life. Morrison died in 1971 in Paris, but the image of that night remained a scar that never faded. From then on, Linda became tougher and took control of every part of her career. Yet, just as she stood firm in the spotlight, the punk wave rose with a young, arrogant face unafraid to attack her in public. That man was Elvis Costello. Number 8. Elvis Costello. Costello's contempt toward Linda by the late 1970s, when Linda Ronstadt was at her peak, selling millions of records and landing on the cover of Rolling Stone, Elvis Costello was only beginning to break through in the new British punk wave. He was young, sharp, and swaggering, intent on smashing the glossy shell of American pop music. To Costello, singers like Linda were the symbol of the safe music punk was born to resist. The story began in 1978 when Linda covered Costello's song Allison for her album, Living in the USA. Her version had a bright pop shine, quite unlike the original's icy bite. The album sold over 2 million copies, putting Elvis Costello's name on radio stations across America. But instead of gratitude, Costello showed disdain. In an interview with New Musical Express magazine, he said Linda's cover was a waste of vinyl. The remark exploded in the press. The Los Angeles Times ran the headline, "Elvis Costello attacks Linda Ronstadt," while Billboard wrote, "A rising artist uses his own song to take down the person who brought it to the masses." Linda did not reply, but her actions spoke clearly. On her year-end tour, she dropped Allison from the setlist and replaced it with a song called Mad Love. Coincidentally or not, that became the title of her album 2 years later. A quiet rejoinder. As Linda kept silent, Costello poured fuel on the fire. At a Toronto press conference in 1979, asked again about the matter, he shrugged and said, "Some people just make music sound nicer so they can sell more of it." CBC replayed the line dozens of times, riling the American public. Newspapers that adored Linda criticized Costello as arrogant and lacking compassion. What hurt Linda was not just the words. Years later, a producer who had worked with both told Variety that at a post-Grammy party, Costello deliberately avoided shaking her hand, even though they were only a few steps apart. Linda saw it, gave a faint smile, and turned away. For her, that was the moment she understood the man behind the song she had once been eager to record. In 1980, Linda released Mad Love, pivoting to a tougher new wave sound and a fiercer vocal edge. Critics called it a musical answer to those who belittled her. Rolling Stone wrote, "Linda Ronstadt does not answer with words, but with force." The album reached number 3 on Billboard, while Costello had to suspend his tour after a racist incident scandal in Ohio. Years later, Costello said he had been young and foolish, but Linda never revisited the topic. Asked about it on a CBS program, she said only, "I don't hate anyone. I just hate the way some people use talent to insult others." Gentle words that cut like a fine blade into an old memory. To Linda, Elvis, Costello was not merely someone who sneered at one recording, but a representative of the contempt for women she had fought throughout her career. Dexter, the legacy of pain and strength. The string of hurts, from Mick Jagger, Paul Simon, Neil Young, Don Henley, David Crosby, Frank Zappa, Jim Morrison, to Elvis Costello, etched a belief into her. Great music is not born from arrogance, but from respect. And perhaps it was from these very wounds that Linda Ronstadt became one of the rare women of her century, able to stand alone in a male-dominated rock world, needing no rebellion and offering no retorts, only raising a voice that could silence even those who once looked down on her. Now, as the stage lights have faded and her voice has fallen silent because of illness, Linda Ronstadt still holds on to what is most precious: her dignity and her sense of self. The people who once hurt her, from arrogant stars to quiet betrayers, are now only closed chapters in the long journey of a woman who dared to stand firm amid the storms of fame. For Linda, strength never lay in striking back, but in the quiet resolve to stay silent until the moment she chose to speak. And when she finally spoke, the world could do nothing but listen. What about you? If you were in Linda's place, would you have remained silent all those years, or confronted those who wounded you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more behind-the-scenes stories.